When you look at old colonial maps, you would see that Europe's flags are everywhere, Africa carved up, India ruled, the Americas transformed. Yet China, one of history's richest, most advanced civilizations, is missing from this global land grab. And that raises an assumption that China simply chose not to conquer. However, 5 centuries ago, China absolutely could have dominated the seas. Its ships were larger than anything Europe had built. Its fleets reached Africa before Columbus reached the Caribbean, and its economy dominated every rival. By all logic, China should have been first in line to build an empire overseas. Instead, history took a brutal turn. While Europe was learning how to conquer the world, China was being forced to fight for its own survival, drugged by foreign traders, defeated in humiliating wars, and nearly erased as a sovereign power. This is the story of a civilization that went from potential superpower to near colony. And once you see that reversal, the real history finally snaps into focus, starting with the moment China chose to turn inward and the world rushed in. Let's rewind to the early 1400s, because this is where most people get China completely wrong. At this moment in history, China was the world's most advanced power. Under the Ming Dynasty, China had the largest economy on Earth, a highly organized state, and technology that Europe could only dream of. And nowhere was this clearer than at sea. This was the age of Admiral Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, China launched 7 massive naval expeditions across the Indian Ocean. Not a few wooden ships, but fleets of hundreds of vessels, carrying tens of thousands of sailors. Some of these ships were over 400 feet long, dwarfing anything Europeans would sail for decades. They reached Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and even East Africa. China had the ships, the manpower, the logistics, and the navigation skills to dominate global trade routes long before Europe arrived. So why didn't China plant flags, seize ports, or build colonies? Because conquest was never the point. China saw itself as the Middle Kingdom, the natural center of civilization. Foreign lands weren't prizes to be ruled, they were places expected to recognize China's superiority through tribute and diplomacy. These voyages were about prestige, trade, and display of power, not occupation or settlement. Governing distant lands was viewed as expensive, unnecessary, and risky. Then came the turning point. After the 1430s, the Ming court abruptly shut the program down. The fleets were dismantled, records were buried, resources were redirected inward. Internal threats, court politics, and the belief that China needed nothing from the outside world took priority. Overseas expansion was seen as a distraction, not an opportunity. While China turned inward by choice, Europe was just getting started, pushing outward with cannons, colonies, and permanent conquest. By the time foreign ships began arriving on China's coast in large numbers, the balance of power had completely shifted. China was still vast, wealthy, and confident in its traditions. But Europe had changed faster. Industrial machines, steam-powered ships, and modern cannons had turned European empires into aggressive global predators. And China, once the center of the world in its own eyes, suddenly found itself in their sights. The breaking point came in the 19th century with the Opium Wars. British merchants were flooding China with opium grown in India, draining silver and leaving millions addicted. When the Qing government tried to shut the trade down, Britain responded with war, not to defend territory, but to protect profits. China lost badly. In 1842, the Treaty of Nanking forced China to hand over Hong Kong, open key ports to foreign trade, and allow British citizens to live under their own laws. Chinese sovereignty had been cracked open, and once that door was open, everyone rushed in. France, Russia, the United States, and others demanded the same privileges. The situation turned critical after 1895, when China was defeated by Japan, once a tributary state. To the imperial powers, this was proof that China was weak. They began what Chinese newspapers called the carving up of the melon. Germany took control of Jiaozhou Bay. Russia pushed deep into Manchuria. Britain dominated the Yangtze River region and expanded Hong Kong. France claimed the south. Japan moved into Fujian. These spheres of influence weren't colonies on paper, but in practice, foreign powers ran railways, mines, ports, and even entire cities. Shanghai became a foreign-controlled world inside China. China still existed on maps, but its control was slipping away piece by piece. It was no longer a civilization expanding outward. It was a prize being divided. By the late 1800s, China looked like it was on borrowed time. Foreign troops were stationed on its soil, its ports were under outside control, and its economy was being drained through unequal treaties. Many countries in this condition simply vanished, absorbed into empires, ruled by governors, wiped off the map. Yet China didn't. And the reason isn't strength alone. It's strategy, scale, and rivalry. First, China was simply too big to swallow. With hundreds of millions of people and a vast interior, fully occupying China would have required enormous armies and endless money. No single empire could do it alone. And that's where rivalry stepped in. Britain, France, Russia, Germany, and Japan all wanted China, but none trusted the others to take it. Every move by one power triggered panic in the rest. This tension peaked during the so-called scramble for China. Spheres of influence spread, but when it came to full partition, the powers hesitated. The clearest sign came in 1899, when Italy demanded control of Sanmen Bay. The Qing court said no. Empress Dowager Cixi reportedly declared that not a single piece of Chinese land would be handed over. Italy backed down, exposed as too weak to force the issue. China could still resist, just not against everyone at once. Then came the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. It was a violent explosion of anti-foreign anger, and it ended in disaster. An 8-nation alliance invaded, crushed the uprising, looted Beijing, and imposed crushing fines. It looked like the end. But instead of partition, something unexpected happened. The imperial powers turned cautious. The United States pushed the open door policy, demanding equal trade access and the preservation of China's territorial integrity. Britain and Germany supported it, not out of kindness, but self-interest. A divided China meant closed markets. China survived not because it won, but because the predators couldn't agree on how to divide the prize. What followed that near-death experience is what modern China calls the century of humiliation. From the first Opium War in 1839 through foreign invasions, forced treaties, and internal collapse, China learned a harsh lesson. Weakness invites interference. That memory never faded. It became the emotional core of China's modern state and the driving force behind one obsession: never be vulnerable again. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the contrast is striking. Instead of foreign gunboats forcing their way into Chinese ports, Chinese goods are moving out to every corner of the world. High-speed trains cut across the country, megaports ship millions of containers, and Chinese companies operate factories in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This isn't colonization in the old sense. There are no governors, no flags, no formal rule, but influence is still being projected through supply chains, infrastructure, and markets. Chinese firms now earn a growing share of their revenue overseas, often higher than what they make at home. They sell electric vehicles, solar panels, electronics, and construction services worldwide. This going global push is driven by economics, new customers, lower production costs, and ways around trade barriers. It's expansion without occupation. And this is where the original question finally flips on its head. China didn't miss the colonial age by accident. When the world was being divided by force, China was fighting to stay whole. When it finally regained strength, the rules of power had changed. Territory mattered less than trade. Cannons mattered less than logistics. So, when you ask why China didn't colonize the world, the real answer lies in history's reversal. For a century, China was the one being pressured, carved, and humiliated. Today, its influence moves quietly through ports, factories, and global markets, shaped by a past it refuses to relive. That is how a civilization that once nearly disappeared learned to project power without planting a single flag.